This is the Ground Game Podcast, where we cover politics from the ground up. Here are your hosts, Tom LoBianco and Patrick Pfingsten.
From sea to shining sea, above the fruited plain, it is barreling to December, and I'm feeling no hope and joy. I'm like the Grinch around here. Patrick Pfingsten, Tom LoBianco with you. Welcome back to the Ground Game. I'm grumpy about
you really are, man,
where we are in the state of our politics. I had a conversation on the radio this week with Joe Walsh, the former congressman from Illinois, who was a Tea Party guy, then became one of the most vociferous anti-Trump voices in the last 4 years. And I'm like, I told him, frankly, I'm exhausted. I've been on the opposite side of Trump, pushing back against what was my party for 9 years. And I'm beat. It's a beat down. And it's like, it's hard to look at what's going on and say it's all going to be great because voters said what they said. Yay.
Well, I still come to the, I still look at these numbers and, I'm more circumspect on everything. And, maybe that's 20 years of covering this crap. But if you look at the way the numbers shook out, it was not a blowout. And I've asked a number of people like this, for something that seems so epochal, why were these not Reagan numbers? And they really weren't. Now, there was a strong showing for sure. Absolutely. And a strong showing for an incredibly damaged candidate. But I don't buy the doom and gloom.
Yeah, but there's a generational shift in the electorate here, right? I mean, or at least a realignment, because we've talked to Mike Madrid about Latino voters, about blue collar voters, about women. I mean, Democrats thought they were going to have an epic gender gap, and she and Harris underperformed Biden in 2020 in a race the Democrats made all about abortion. It's just, we are at a serious crossroads in our politics, and Republicans are benefiting because they've got a personality heading their ticket, their party at this point, and Democrats just seem completely lost in the wilderness.
I think that everybody is overreacting to this, incredibly so. And I think now what's worth engaging on, I think, and is very real, are these policy plans, these policy statements that we are seeing being enacted, that are the plans are really. It is some of the key cornerstones of Project 2025, the mass deportations, the realigning of the executive power, of cracking down on traditional media, fighting traditional media in the White House press room. These things are all real things. Hiring somebody or nominating somebody who was said that he wants to investigate political people. Trump himself saying that he wants to investigate members of Congress. But in terms of the electoral results, I just think that's been wildly overstated. And some of that is, I just think it's been wildly overstated the more that we see the numbers on this. And the thing to remember with Trump is that, Trump is like if you had P.T. Barnum as the spokesman for the Baltimore Ravens. Okay. The Ravens win Super Bowls on field goals. Okay. You win by one field goal. All right. You'll win by a field goal. You won the Super Bowl. Okay. But still, it was not a blowout.
It was the greatest, most beautiful, shining field goal you've ever seen, and it was the most lopsided victory ever.
Yeah, exactly.
That sort of P.T. Barnum thing.
Exactly. The result does not matter. It does not matter the result. The rhetoric will always be the same. And I keep that in mind constantly. I've been writing about this guy for more than a decade now. That's how you cover that guy.
All right. Coming up on the show, we'll have Taegan Goddard, who writes the great politicalwire.com website. He's been in the game for many, many years, and this ain't his first transition. So we'll get his perspective on what's going on, and maybe maybe he'll tell us who's right. If I think we're in this generational realignment of our politics, or if it's Tom World who thinks it's no big deal. But no big deal out there. All right, you want to get into it, bud?
Let's do it.
First down.
And so we brought up the cabinet a little bit, where we're at as we record this on Tuesday afternoon, December 10th. It sure looks like Trump's cabinet nominees at this point are all in pretty darn good shape, at least compared to where they have been. I mean, I thought at one point last week, I may have even told you this, that I didn't think Hegseth was going to make it through the day, and has somehow righted the ship, gotten Trump to come out in support of him. I mean, there was talk that they were going to replace him with Ron DeSantis, who was Trump's arch nemesis for a while. And now Hegseth is looking okay and has been a heat shield to protect Gabbard and RFK Jr. and Kash freaking Patel. Every single one of these guys are going to get in, aren't they?
We've been covering Trump for a decade. You know, I said this last week. I'll say it again. The artificial scandal, the manufactured scandal. Look, did Trump actually meet with Ron DeSantis? Yes, absolutely. Was he seriously considering him? Maybe. Who knows? Was it ever going to happen? I don't think so. But it's constant distraction. It's constant circus. The bigger one here, to my mind, and I mean, if you read some of these stories about her, is Tulsi Gabbard. It is, I mean, people
so
ask,
bad.
It
so
is
bad.
Hegseth is easy pickings because these stories get leaked very fast. Counter stories get leaked very fast, and it's kind of like catnip for the cable news Twitter crowd. And that is, hugely important. It is the American fighting force, the most powerful in the entire world. Maybe not as powerful as Elon Musk's Space Force, but still incredibly powerful. But Tulsi Gabbard and whatever is in that secret safe file in the royal palace in Damascus, whatever hard files are on her in there, that is monumentally important.
I hadn't even thought about what Syria may have. Because she's certainly been, if not favorable to Assad, completely pro-Assad. And I think there is a difference, and maybe we're missing this, or at least the national media is missing.
Yeah, that's why we're here.
I don't prescribe to them. Is that Hegseth is dangerously unqualified. Gabbard is downright dangerous.
Yeah.
Because she may or may not be, but definitely totally is compromised. Kash Patel is dangerous in the things that he said, the people he's aligned with, his gosh darn enemies list of people he wants to put in prison because they don't like his political daddy. These aren't people that should be in positions of power. Yet here we are. I think they're all going to skate. I think they're all going to be fine. And all hell's going to break loose because of it.
Gabbard, the drumbeat around Gabbard and the intelligence world is a very different world from what most of us typically cover. I would not be so sure about Gabbard. Kash Patel, that could be different. And I would also note too, it's not, these people that he says that he wants to investigate because of, whatever. I've never heard them say that they don't like Trump. It's all because Trump doesn't like them. And so we got to remember that. We have to always maintain some clarity in this. It's Trump's personal grievances. Trump doesn't like them, so Trump wants them attacked. It's not a counterpunch, it's a punch.
My friend Adam Kinzinger, in response to the enemies list and Trump saying he should be in prison this weekend, which we'll talk about, basically just said, bring it on. And yeah. I like that attitude.
Yeah.
Next.
It's second down.
All right, you're way more read into this than I am. The murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, the manhunt that led to a McDonald's in Pennsylvania, somewhere where a nice lady enjoying her what do they call those? Not the blizzards, but the
that's a McBlizzard or whatever the hell
McFlurry. The McFlurry,
yes.
The little lady eating her McFlurry saw this kid match the description and called police. Where does it stand, and what sticks out to you thus far?
Oh boy. Well, yes. So that and he's been charged now. So I feel better saying it. This is not a Richard. This does not appear to be a Richard Jewell situation where it's a person of interest, and it turns out not to be correct. Is the person who's charged by New York City police?
I thought you were going Richard Kimball situation. Our fugitive's name is Dr. Richard Kimball.
I am not Chicago.
Go get him.
Apparently, that's right. Is this guy Luigi Mangione? Okay, who now I grew up in. Yeah, right. As another paisan from the Baltimore area, I can tell you that where he grew up is probably about 10, 15 minutes north of where I grew up, in the suburbs of Baltimore in Baltimore County. This kid comes from Baltimore royalty. Okay, the Mangione family owned country clubs around the Baltimore metro region. If you remember, this is funny. I'm pretty sure this is Les Kinsolving. Remember the crazy guy when it used to be just one crazy guy in the White House press briefing room who would scream questions as opposed to half of the press briefing room being crazy people. Les Kinsolving was for decades was the one who would like scream out wild conspiracy theories. Who killed Vernon Jordan? He used to be on that radio station, WCBM 680 up in Baltimore. Mangione's family is the one that owned that. He was the valedictorian of Gilman, which is like Gilman is like the Harvard. It's like one of these like Phillips Andovers of Baltimore. Now, granted, it's a prep school of Baltimore, so it's we're still second tier, okay, but that counts as Baltimore royalty. All right, that's pretty big stuff. I was really shocked reading about his background. That this is the guy who maybe he got radicalized. Who knows what happened? Lord knows we're going to find out about it. But whatever happened with this kid, he was raised to be the cream of the crop, was apparently very brilliant, and something happened where he starts writing these reviews online about how brilliant Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was in his understandings of humanity. Something happened with this kid, and he just it's something.
Let me first say, even if you're Rupert Murdoch or think of any corporate titan who sucks, you don't deserve to be gunned down on the street. Let me be clear in that. And I detest insurance companies like most of us do. Anyone who's ever had to get something pre-authorized, and with a currently pregnant wife, the things that we've had to deal with are super annoying. But the reaction from some spaces on the left, especially on your beloved Blue Sky, that have outright celebrated the death of a health insurance executive, the murder of a health insurance executive is less than it's not even sad. It is sick. It is maddening that there are people who think that this was okay. And it's not fringy. It's not like the weird people on Twitter who said, "Oh, I wish that bullet would have hit Trump." There are people saying this guy deserved it.
Right. It's terrible, man. How
do we get to this? How do we get to this? This guy had a family.
It's terrible, man. It's what you're starting to see is, and I actually write about this a little bit in the current edition of the 24/7. You're starting to see.
Where do you find the 24/7?
24site.news, 24sight.news, friends. Sign up.
Plug it.
Bam. You are starting to see the radicalization in terms of discourse and discussion of the left driven by online engagement in a way that the right has been radicalized for the better part of 2 decades now. And I'm thinking back to like Tea Party and like pre-Tea Party, 2007, 2008, where death threats, and I hope this does not keep up, but on the right and the extreme right, the Tea Party and MAGA, death threats and violence have been a normal part of that discussion for years now, unfortunately. And it's wrong there, and it's wrong on the left too. You shouldn't be calling for anybody to get murdered. I don't know. Like, I mean, yes, I'm a reporter. I'm detached. I practice objectivity professionally, but I think we can all agree that don't call on people to get murdered. Like, Jesus.
There's no question of objectivity to not root for someone to be murdered. I think it's okay for you to take that.
Okay, thanks, man.
All right, Trump meets the press this previous weekend.
Yay.
Talking to Kristen Welker. Really his first public statements since the election, and it was as you expect, completely batshit conspiracy theory, wild lies and craziness. And I know you're not going to put down a fellow member of the Washington Press Corps, but Kristen Welker almost never pushed back on him in the entire interview. What was your big takeaway from this Meet the Press interview?
Oh, I do this regularly in covering him and covering the extremist politicians, or at least the people who present as extremist, I should note. Just strip away the names, strip away the extremism in terms of the rhetoric, and say what happened. Look, the incoming president-elect said that he wants members of Congress thrown in jail. That is insane. And for what?
And he didn't imply it. He literally said Liz Cheney, Benny Thompson, Adam Kinzinger, Adam Schiff, etc. should be, he said jail, but he meant prison. He said they should be in prison.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
He said it, literal words.
Why?
Not
right,
analogy,
exactly.
not insinuating. He said it. He said the words, people.
Right. And why did that happen? Because they investigated his attempt to overthrow the government on January 6th. Because they stood up for themselves, and because they, investigated an attack on the U.S. Capitol. I don't understand. I will never understand how January 6th and a president saying that he wants an incoming president, returning president saying that he wants lawmakers, members of Congress. I mean, this reminds me of like this stuff that we hear out of like Brazil. Apparently South Korea now too. What happened over there with
when you think a stable democracy ain't so stable, look at South Korea.
Yeah. So I mean that all the rest of it. I frankly I didn't even watch it because it's the whole thing. I took in the clips, but incoming president of the United States said that he wants members of Congress thrown in jail. Period.
And continues to deny 2020.
Yeah,
continues to lie. It's just the next 4 years or however long before he has his last Big Mac. This is going to be an excruciating 4 years, because we are living in a post-truth society, and it makes me absolutely insane.
Not post-truth, post-truth for some people.
For the Republican Party, the entire Republican Party. I was at a luncheon last Friday, where I may have been one of like 3 people in the room who didn't vote for Trump.
Okay.
And I got plenty of dirty looks for it. And I walked through that room, and I'm just like, these are people that I thought were serious. These are people that I thought really understood how politics and policy works. And they've just gone off the deep end. They've gone off the deep end. And one of the conversation was off the record, but I can say that it was Ohio Senator-elect Bernie Moreno spoke at the event. And And there were things in there. He was charming. He was funny. He was all those things. But there were some outright crazy bullshit lies. It's just like, how do we get away with that? How did my party, what was my party, turn into this raging swamp of inferno bullshit, gaseous, noxious fumes?
Those
words don't even work together, man. But they all work because it's that crazy.
I feel your frustration. I mean, I imagine the corollary for me would be finding serious journalists who've been covering politics and government for years and years and years, being forced to chase Marjorie Taylor Greene because, maybe the Jewish space laser is cooking up something good. It's
worse than that because she's still newsworthy. It would be like finding out that Walter Cronkite faked the coverage of the moon landing.
No, he
because
did.
It would be everything's a lie.
He did. You have no proof. I'm just asking questions.
Next. All right. So one of the most outrageous things from the Trump interview was his promise to end birthright citizenship on day one. It would be literally, I think he said literally day one, along with pardoning the January 6th criminals. Here's the problem. The 14th Amendment of the Constitution guarantees birthright citizenship.
Yeah.
Here we go, though.
So we can't.
They're going to claim that they did it, even though they can't. They're going to claim that the Constitution is rigged, even though they're the people who run around with pocket constitutions in their back pocket. This is infuriating to me, Tom. It is infuriating to me that this level of pervasive bullshit covers every inch of the Republican Party today. And no Republican is pushing back. No U.S. senator where you've got gaggles of reporters outside of every office chasing these guys down the hallway in the Hart building. Not a single Republican has the stones to say the president can't do that.
You're asking for something of people that won't and cannot do it. I just accept that reality. And I mean, it's different for me, obviously, because, I have the luxury of being a reporter, so I'm not in any of these camps. But I feel your frustration, man.
I'm not in their camp anymore either, obviously.
Well, that's right. Boy, talk about the politically homeless. All right. Jesus.
It's brutal. I am, and for so many Republicans who look at me and say, well, he's just a Democrat now. Certainly not. I'm still conservative, and it's just like I look at the right and think they're batshit insane. I look at the left, I think they're completely off the reservation, and I have to assume there are tens of millions of people like me
that are
watching our politics today and saying, "What the hell happened?"
They stayed home. They did not.
They did stay home. I mean, that's why there were so few votes. Trump improved his vote share in Illinois by like 5% in 2024 from 2020, even with a huge decline in votes, something like 400,000 fewer voters in Illinois. And he got he got 2,200 more votes than he did in 2020. Wow. He makes up 5 points and added 2,000 votes. It was a huge middle of the road, stayed home sort of election. Those were the people Harris needed to win.
Yes.
And man. I technically would have stayed home if you look at my ballot because I voted for neither of them. So, it's just.
You're down ballot warrior.
I have not voted in a presidential election, a general election since 2012.
Wow.
And I am as politically connected and tuned in as anyone and I can't bring myself to vote for these people, and that's where we are. All right, let's get to Taegan Goddard from Political Wire.
It's time to go in the huddle.
All right, so to help us through all of the mess and madness that we're in, we are pleased to welcome Taegan Goddard, who writes politicalwire.com. Taegan, I appreciate your time today as we're trying to sort through where the heck we're at as the end of 2024 approaches and whatever may happen in 2025 is forthcoming. But I guess we'll start here. in terms of transition, this isn't any normal transition, right? This is a group of crazy bootlickers, people who are unqualified, people who are potentially in bed with Russians. If you're paying attention to Tulsi Gabbard, this is just uncharted waters, right?
It's a pretty extraordinary transition, certainly. What it is not surprising. And the reason for that is, first of all, we've seen Trump go through a transition before. He was president before. We kind of understand the way he operates. But more importantly, nothing that we're seeing in this transition isn't what Donald Trump proved he would do or said he would do in the campaign. He talked to, each of these controversial nominees who threatened to shake up entire bureaucracies. Donald Trump telegraphed all of this during his campaign. And while many people were focused on his comments on Hannibal Lecter or on electric boats and sharks and things like this, might have missed the fact that he said he would do exactly what he's doing right now. The idea of putting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. As Secretary of Health and Human Services, it might come a shock to some, but it's actually exactly what he said he was going to do in terms of the type of person that he wanted for that role. Somebody who is going to take on the bureaucracy in the in the Justice Department, whether it's Pam Bondi, Matt Gaetz before her, or Kash Patel as the director of the FBI. I mean, Donald Trump said he was going to do this. So even though it is shocking, and even though it is different than what we've seen, it really shouldn't be surprising to anyone.
I've been obsessing over the Gilded Age recently, and the turn of the other century, the previous century. Do you think is that a good historic antecedent for this moment that we're living in writ large?
That remains to be seen. I mean, obviously, I can see how you could draw that conclusion, and it is certainly fascinating to see the number of billionaires that have surrounded this incoming president, and the way that he is kind of blurring the lines between the private sector and government, and all of the ethical boundaries that were set up over the course of the last century to kind of to prevent corrupt activity, to prevent corruption. I mean, all of that is changing. So I could see how you could draw a conclusion to an earlier time in our history, but it's too early to say what this is going to be. What I find most interesting, let's just take Elon Musk for example. Obviously, he spent nearly $300 million of his own money to help Donald Trump get elected. He seems to be a constant presence at Mar-a-Lago during the transition as Donald Trump is staffing his new government. What's been most interesting this week is reports on how Elon Musk has essentially promised to be a political enforcer of Donald Trump's policies, that he wants Trump to be a successful president. He wants him to do what he promised, and that Elon Musk is willing to spend money in opposition to those politicians who may stand in his way, meaning that he's almost certainly going to use a super PAC to fund primary challenges to Democrats, Republicans, anybody who stands in his way. He's going to be a force there. And that's something that we've never seen before in American politics. The wealthiest man in the world who has absolutely taken a side here and is willing to act as an enforcer for Donald Trump. That's remarkable. So, but I don't think it's going to be the only remarkable thing we've seen. I think we're going to see quite a few things like that are really going to break new ground in our politics.
But it's par for the course with these guys, right? It's the politics of grievance and retribution. They've telegraphed this, that if you're on our bad side, you are the enemy.
Yeah, no, it's been particularly interesting to watch in Pete Hegseth's nomination as defense secretary, and Joni Ernst, who really was the one Republican senator that everyone looked to say, will she come out against Pete Hegseth? And if she did, then other Republican senators might find cover and might be willing to, follow her lead and possibly doom Hegseth's nomination. That didn't happen this week. This week, we actually saw Joni Ernst say she wouldn't oppose his nomination. And in the reasoning for it, at least if you believe the reporting, is that Donald Trump and his political operation would have either promised or threatened a primary challenge to Joni Ernst if she seeks re-election. And that's something that Joni Ernst doesn't want to seek. So you've got the political retribution, but then you've got it backed up by Elon Musk's money. It's a pretty powerful combo.
They're all jellyfish, spineless jellyfish.
Well, I mean, it's amazing because if I can't remember somebody, Pete Hegseth makes John Towers' nomination as defense secretary look pretty tame in comparison.
Harriet Miers looks like a statesman.
Harriet Miers as well. I mean, there have been some pretty bad nominations around, but Donald Trump has probably got half a dozen of the top 10 all-time lists here in his cabinet. And it looks like a lot of them are going to get through. Now, Matt Gaetz was one step too far, I guess, but it looks like Donald Trump is going to fight for Pete Hegseth, and that probably provides cover for Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy, Linda McMahon, some of the other more controversial nominations. So we'll see. It's when we get to the Senate confirmation process, that will be interesting. Absolutely.
This is an existential question, and feel free to deflect. Why is Tulsi Gabbard so weirdly in line with Putin and Assad? I keep reading these stories. My friend and former colleague Jake LaHutte, when he was working at the Keene Sentinel, had one of these interviews, and it's like they'll go with her back in 2020 when she was in the Democratic primary, and they'll go semi-normal for a little bit until you touch a nerve, and she's like, all right, we're done. Screw this. I don't want to talk about this. What is going on with her?
Well, that's a question that a lot of us are asking. It's a question that a lot of Democratic senators will be asking at her confirmation hearing. If you believe the reporting, many of her former aides say it's not that she's a Russian asset. It's not that she's at least a willing Russian asset. It's that she has very questionable sources for news and for information, and that she really reads things that are not necessarily credible. And now that would be amazing to me if somebody who has really bad sources of information ends up heading up the intelligence community. That would be a pretty striking thing. She if so, she could be easily the most damaging of Donald Trump's nominations. But I expect her confirmation hearings will certainly be interesting. The one wrinkle in those is that because she is up for National Intelligence Director, is that those hearings, or at least large portions of those hearings, could actually be behind closed doors, and that we might not hear some of the more outrageous claims made. So anyway, that remains to be seen, though. I would expect Republicans would actually want to have those hearings in public instead of in private, actually, because I think there's less you can talk about.
Oh, right.
They can actually speak freely in a private one, though, in a skiff somewhere. I mean, that's
exactly.
I mean, that could almost benefit them, is they're able to say what they want, and they're not going to get retribution because Trump people aren't going to be in there, other than Gabbard herself. But I'm interested, Taegan, as to how we got here, and I think Trump even has the self-realization to know that it was the economy and immigration, right? He said so in his Meet the Press interview this weekend, which was batshit to say the least. But at least, I mean, he saw what even Democrats don't seem to see, that it was people who are angry about the state of the economy. Even if inflation has come back to earth, it still doesn't mean that those prices have come down. They're still where they were when inflation was through the roof. Harris never had a good plan for that. Harris never had a good plan for immigration, other than to say, I'm going to pass this Senate bill, which most of America has no idea what was in it. How did Democrats get immigration and the economy so wrong in this election?
Well, that's a great question. I think the economy, it was actually quite simple. I said, even though I think Democrats did, and the Biden administration did a fairly good job at trying to squash inflation once they could, again, they worsened it by passing one of those big COVID packages, in the first few weeks of his administration. That only made inflation worse. And, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, warned at the time that this was going to be a problem. But after that time, I think the Biden administration did a good job to finally wrangle inflation, along with help from the Fed. The problem is that after 4 years, when your prices are up 25 or 30%, and they're not ever going down, prices don't ever really go down. And so everybody's paying 25 or 30% more than they did 4 years ago. It's a pretty impossible political message to spin at that time. So, that's tough. In terms of immigration, that is definitely an issue where Democrats dropped the ball. They never really had a handle on how important and how potent that issue was for large swaths of the country. They also seem to have had a misstep, thinking that Latinos would take a favorable impression the more liberal their views were on immigration. Turns out that backfired badly, and that ever since 2012, when Mitt Romney lost, and there was an autopsy of why Romney lost, and the recommendations were that you need to liberalize your positions on immigration, that you're too harsh, and that this is really hurting you with Latino voters. Well, it turns out that was wrong, and that Trump had it right, and that actually many Latino voters are just as worried about immigration as other voters. And so there was no real advantage for Democrats to try to appease the left on that issue. So it seems to have backfired quite badly for them. That said, your question, how did we get here? I think the Democrats, those were tough issues, no doubt about it. It was made tougher by the fact that Joe Biden tried to run for re-election, failed miserably, gave Kamala Harris only 100 days to get a campaign off the ground and to get her messaging right. And while I think she probably did as good a job as somebody could with only 100 days, American presidential campaigns are far longer than 100 days. I mean, you remember Donald Trump announced his run back right after the midterms, in 2022. I mean, so Donald Trump had 2 years to run. And when I look at, how did that shortened time period hurt Kamala Harris? I think it hurt because I think that they had two completely different communication strategies. Kamala Harris had a much more traditional strategy, doing interviews with mainstream media, being on the late night talk shows when she would do that. Donald Trump made this very unconventional gamble where he completely bypassed traditional media. He didn't do legacy media interviews. He didn't do cable network appearances. He didn't do sit downs even with local TV anchors. He didn't do a second debate with Kamala Harris. He backed out of 60 Minutes interview, as you remember. He backed out of another interview with NBC News. He turned down a CNN town hall event, which Kamala Harris did do. And instead, he went on podcasts, and he sat down remarkably for 3 hours with Joe Rogan, an interview which was heard by tens of millions of people. Because that 60 Minutes show that he turned down, because that was I think it was on a Monday or Tuesday, it only got 4 or 5 million viewers in that time slot. Instead, he's on Joe Rogan getting 45, 50, 60 million viewers. And it's not only that, long gone are the times of the soundbite. You remember when the evening news was 22 minutes when you accounted for the ads and you had to get your message out, you needed to get a 15-second soundbite. And even sometimes 15 seconds was too long. Now Donald Trump can sit down with Joe Rogan for 3 hours and they can just shoot the shit about anything, and about celebrities and about, cultural issues and things that are going on. And I have to say, it was a much smarter strategy. And when you look at a poll that came out this week from Navigator Research, a Democratic polling firm, turns out that swing voters don't get their news from these traditional sources anymore. In fact, they get it from these alternative platforms like podcasts. And so, people, talked about, the mainstream media talked about how Donald Trump was avoiding mainstream media interviews, that he wasn't willing to subject himself. Turns out he might have had a much smarter strategy in terms of getting to the voters that mattered in this election.
Yeah, and I think, I've made this argument a number of times in, my newsletter 24/7, that, as a professional term, I think it's time for us, I'm certainly legacy media, for us to acknowledge that reality. I don't know if Nielsen can properly account for YouTube views and, cross-platform with Apple, Spotify, and whatnot on the podcast, but those numbers are real, and it's not ephemeral like it is with, for instance, some of these Twitter spaces, to the point where that Joe Rogan, some of these other ones, Sean Ryan, I think he was like a former producer for like 48 Hours or something. These guys, with these massive audiences, they are the mainstream. These people on YouTube are now the mainstream. They get through to so many more people than we can potentially. I mean, it's remarkable.
Well, Tom, here's the just a recent example. We had over a Thanksgiving holiday, I had 3 sons home, and they're all men in their 20s. And what was the first thing that they would do when they sit down in front of the TV at night and, people just want to relax and whatever?
They would call you bruh. Oh,
they didn't do that. But you know what they did? They didn't turn on CNN. They didn't turn on one of the networks. What they did was they launched the YouTube app, and they went right through YouTube. And the things that we watched with our sons over that weekend were, it was really eye-opening. Sometimes we were watching podcasts because the podcasts are being put up on YouTube. Sometimes we were watching these really esoteric shows that you would never have heard of before. And I'll tell you this, after a weekend of watching some of this stuff, it was pretty interesting. It's pretty engaging. And so if you're being, when you think about, Kamala Harris, her campaign being, managed for a large part by people who were of the Obama campaign back starting in 2008, the media environment is vastly different than 2008. People are looking at different things. It's not comparable. And I'll tell you a little quick story about that. In 2012, when Obama won re-election, I went to the post-election conference up at Harvard's Institute of Politics, where you had on a conference table, you had one side of the conference table was the Obama aides. The other side of the conference table were the Romney aides. I was sitting right behind Stu Stevens and Matt Rhodes, from the Obama campaign. And at one point,
they were Romney guys.
They were the Romney guys.
Yeah.
And at one point, the Obama team was talking about, how did you actually get to young voters? This is back in 2012 now. How did you get to young voters? Because the Obama campaign miraculously increased their support among young voters and increased turnout on the second from 2008, when it was really just a remarkable thing in 2008. They actually increased the turnout of young voters. How did they do that? And they described that they ran an entire campaign on Facebook, and by doing so, they could get 98% of the young voters in this country through Facebook. And because the Romney campaign wasn't there, they ran an entirely positive campaign. Now, at that point, when this story was being told, Stu Stevens leaned back in his chair and said to Matt Rhodes, the campaign manager, Stevens was the chief strategist, Rhodes was the campaign manager, and he just said, it shook his head and said they were running a completely different campaign than we were. Now, I wasn't at that Harvard conference this last week when the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign showed up, but I'll bet you the exact same thing happened because the Trump campaign had a completely different strategy in terms of how they were getting their message out to voters. But it really reminded me of how Obama did that in 2012. The Trump campaign they made what was a very unconventional but calculated gamble. It turned out they were right. You didn't need the mainstream media.
Yeah, and as a guy who's run campaigns for a lot of the last 14 years, I feel like we're in a position where both parties moving forward are going to have to learn completely new ways of doing campaigns, because a lot of what the Trump campaign did this time around was focused on his brand, his personality, not about ideals, not about morals, not about a platform. And Democrats sort of did the same old thing, especially once Harris took over. I mean, and like they did a few podcasts, the Golden State Warriors guys, the Call Her Daddy girl, which by the way, in comparison to Rogan and his 50 million views on their interview, I think the Call Her Daddy one got got under 1 million, like 970,000 or something. So they weren't even playing in the same space, comparing Rogan to the stuff Harris was doing. But it seems like both sides are going to have to relearn how to do campaigns, not even for 28, but for 26.
Oh, I totally agree with that. And I think that Democrats can learn a lot of lessons from what just happened to them here. But here we are talking on a podcast, right? And you and I, we all listen to podcasts, and they're wonderful. It's one of the best mediums. And the reason for it is that you can actually listen at any time that you want, a conversation between people who are knowledgeable about their field, and you can start that while you're in the car doing errands. You can continue it when you're walking your dog. You can continue it again when you're doing dishes or something, at night. And this conversation that may have stretched, in the case of Donald Trump's interview with Joe Rogan, may have stretched for 3 hours. It's not hard to consume a 3-hour conversation over the course of, multiple listening times. And there's something that comes out there that's a little bit different. And this has always been Donald Trump's advantage. When we listen to Donald Trump in a stump speech or one of his rallies, or he gives an interview with a mainstream reporter, it gets very combative. He says crazy things. If you talk to people who have actually sat down at dinner with Donald Trump, and I know people who did this before he was president, they actually say he's actually a fairly engaging guy, and he's personable. He's fairly interesting.
Charming and charismatic are the two words you always hear.
Charming and charismatic. And a lot of people who only see Donald Trump in the rally, when he's doing rallies or things like this, they're not really seeing the same Donald Trump. But I'll bet you a lot of those Democrats who are shocked by this election result, I bet you many of them have never listened to that Joe Rogan interview. And you'll find out if you listen to it, he comes across as a different guy. And he's not the same guy that is up there talking about Hannibal Lecter and he's the showman playing a certain character. Instead, he's just a guy talking about things that he's seen or things that he's read or cultural phenomenon and all the rest. It's a remarkable thing. It plays to his skills. And keep in mind that if Donald Trump has a skill, it's that before he got into politics officially, he spent 20 years mining what I call the underbelly of American media. The elite media shunned him. So instead, he shows up on Howard Stern regularly, who at the time was the shock jock, who was not part of the mainstream media. He showed up every week, every Monday morning, I think it was, on the Don Imus show. He started showing up on Fox and Friends. And, we know of his relationship with the National Enquirer and the other tabloids. He's like, if the elite media is going to ignore me, well, there's this entire media ecosystem out here that won't ignore me. And by the way, a lot of them vote, and a lot of them have become his base, and a lot of them were mobilized to go to the polls this year. So Donald Trump, whatever you want to think about him, you can't say he's an idiot when it comes to actually building and acquiring an audience, as he's done in the media over the years, because he's done a good job. And it's proof positive is that he's won the presidency twice, despite never having won any other political office in his life.
It's remarkable. It reminds me of Dick Lugar used to tell all of his staff, he's working on this high-minded nuclear disarmament. They've got global leaders around the table with him and Sam Nunn. But he would always tell every member of his staff, you need to subscribe to People magazine.
Yep. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Go ahead, please.
No, I think that's the case. I think that the Democrats, if you look at the interviews that Kamala Harris did, if you looked at their media strategy, I think it was just not in tune with the times that we're in.
Amen.
Taegan, what are you working on politicalwire.com?
Just, at this point, it's really covering the transition. As we started out talking about, it's one of the stranger transitions that we have ever seen. Years ago, I wrote a book called You Won, Now What, which was all about the transition that happens after the election and how you get these many people who don't really understand how government works appointed to positions and how hard it is for them to navigate this world. And that is exactly where we find ourselves once again. A lot of people saying, okay, Trump won. Now what? Here's what we're going to do. The difference with this is that Trump actually was president. He was president before. And but many of the people that he's appointed have never served in public office. And so they're going to find it's going to be a rude awakening for some of them, starting with the confirmation hearings, starting with the questions that they're going to be asked. And we know that Donald Trump's first term was chaotic most of the time. I would expect that's where we're going to get a lot more of that this time.
Taegan Goddard, politicalwire.com. Thanks so much for the time. We appreciate it.
Guys, you're great to have me. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Taegan.
It's time for the second half.
All right. Thanks to Taegan Goddard from Political Wire. Dude's awesome. I think I say that every time because we try and bring you awesome people.
We do. We got some great guests, Joe.
We've gotten very lucky with good guests, quality guests, people who know what they're talking about, are certainly more logical than me these days, who just hates everyone. You all suck. Let's do a little Q&A. You can send us questions on Twitter at @ground_game_pod. You cannot tweet Tom because he nuked his Twitter account. But he thinks Blue Sky is the second coming.
I don't like Nazis. What can I say?
I don't like that. I hate Illinois. I live in Illinois. I hate Illinois Nazis. There you go. See, that's two movie references. Two Chicago movie references.
Man.
There's two Chicago movie references in this show. Even though that scene in The Fugitive was actually filmed in North Carolina somewhere, but
was it really?
Yeah. They filmed all the stuff in the woods in North Carolina.
Oh man!
They actually have the derailed train at a depot or something down there. So we're completely off the reservation now. All right, first question: how do Democrats move forward? DNC chair, 2028.
Let's go.
Winning back the House and Senate in 2026.
Yeah.
How do they move forward from being in the wilderness at the moment?
I think. Well. And I know we've discussed this before. The Pod Save America types, stop listening to them. That's over. That's done with. Now, this fight that's going on right now, kind of between like Ben Wickler side of things, and you see some of this playing out in the DNC race, which will happen on February 1st, I believe. Like the Ben Wickler progressives versus these like the Rye Teixeira moderate type Democrats. They have to figure out some way to unite everybody, how to pull them all together. It's probably, as it turns out, it's probably not Liz Cheney at the top of everything, but you got to figure out how to do some coalition building. I think we've talked about it before. What are the issues they can agree on? you know, and Orange Man bad doesn't work, as we have found out. So it's got to be something other than that.
But you need a killer.
You do.
I don't know that Ben Wickler is a killer or the guy from Minnesota is a killer. You know who's a killer?
AOC.
Rahm Emanuel. Rahm Emanuel will murder you with his little bear dancing hands. He was a ballet dancer.
Well, the DNC chair, I mean, so a couple things on the chair of the party. The chair of the party can be the front-facing person, right? It's not, but that's not always.
Especially for the next 2 years, they totally can be.
Unless you want your House leaders to fill that role, unless you want some of the governors to fill that role, as we've seen. And there's a deep bench. I mean, I still stand by, coming out of the DNC, I was really struck by how deep a bench the Democrats had versus the bench for the Republicans. And the Democrats, to me, still, you look like Jasmine Crockett, Maxwell Frost, some of the governors like Gretchen Whitmer. I was really surprised by the level and depth of talent they have to work with. That used to be the Republicans more over a decade ago before Trump showed up. So maybe you go to them and you let Rombo do all the fundraising and whatnot, which is what he's primed for anyway. Yeah, let him do that.
The thing is, though, you put Emanuel in a TV studio morning to night, and he can just unload on Trump all day without any repercussion, and he can be the most.
Help? But does punching into the thing that likes to get punched help? I don't think it does.
You can't just let Trump go unchecked, right? I mean, somebody's got to be doing the swinging. And does Hakeem Jeffries come across as the bulldog?
No, not really.
I don't see it. Schumer just comes across as your whiny grandpa.
Well, they got to figure out how they're going forward on it, because if you have one half of your party hearing constantly the attacks on Trump, or I should say the counterattacks, seeing as he's the one doing the punching, if you hear all these counter punches going on, that would be counterproductive to the move past this, chart a path forward. They have to figure, and I don't know what the answer is here. I don't know how they're going to do that. That's not my job. But they need to figure something out.
Last question: will Mayor Pete become Governor Pete?
I've
Buttigieg being rumored as a potential candidate for governor in Michigan. He was Indiana, moved to Michigan.
Yep.
Sometime in the last 4 years. And Whitmer is, of course, term limited. I would assume that the Attorney General in Wisconsin, or in Michigan, is that Dana?
Oh, Nessel.
Dana Nessel. I assume she's, what they call an Attorney General, an aspiring governor. I assume she's in the mix, but Pete's certainly limited in his options now that they just filled the Senate seat. I don't think Gary Peters is going anywhere. He moved out of Indiana, so at least he's not in the Democratic wilderness in Indiana. What's his future? Is it governor?
You know what? I hear a lot of that chatter. I actually don't think I don't think he can, because, again, it goes back to that people that have long been in Michigan politics who have some standing around there, especially for Michigan's different than Indiana. Indiana, you can rise as a star pretty easily because of the lack of power of the Democrats there. Not the case in Michigan. You got a lot of people who have been working that for a long time. They have their own operations. So I hear the chatter, but that strikes me as like one of those things where it's more Washington chatter than it is Michigan chatter. And that's going to be a Michigan race.
He certainly wants to run for president in 2028. And sure. he is easily one of the most qualified and most talented communicators in the Democratic Party. So there should be a place for him. I don't necessarily know that he was a great Secretary of Transportation. I don't know that, but I mean, what is a great Secretary of Transportation? There should be a place for him because he has appeal. I think he has an appeal across the board. he's the guy that goes on Fox News and turns people around.
Yeah.
I just don't know where that is for him, because, if Michigan governor is tough to find, you don't want to run for some other constitutional office in Michigan because that's below him at this point.
Right.
There's no Senate seat. I don't even know where they live, to what congressional district they would be in. I think they're somewhere near Michigan City, but I don't see where his path is. I mean, he's obviously at least going to have to make some money between now and when he would launch a political campaign, because he's got a family and kids and all that stuff. You can't just rest on your laurels for 2 years. So I'm really interested to see what he does next, because he's a really talented guy. I don't agree with him on much, but I see that he's a very talented guy, and he's the kind of communicator the Democrats need. If Rahm Emanuel is that guy with the battle axe going all Braveheart, William Wallace at you, Buttigieg is the guy that can kill you with kindness. And there's a good counterbalance there.
Deputize him at the DNC and put him on Fox News all the time.
He'll probably do that anyway.
Yeah. Under the auspices, he's running a shadow campaign for president. I mean, people eat that up.
Yeah. And then you're going to see, you're also going to see a lot of territory stuff among Democrats, because you've got Newsom, who wants to be president, Pritzker, who wants to be president, Shapiro, who wants to be president, Whitmer, who wants to be president, half of the Senate Democrats that want to be president. There's going to be a lot of internal strife over, well, you're taking my slot on Morning Joe. I wanted to talk to Rachel. So I think you're going to see a lot of bitchiness, for lack of a better term, among Democrats over the next 4 years as well. All right. We appreciate you joining us. We appreciate Taegan Goddard for his time.
Yes.
Thanks so much for giving us your time. Like, rate, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. Share us on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever, and help us get the word out, because we're trying to have decent, smart political coverage here. And if we can't be smart, we're going to find smart people to come and talk to us. So help us build our brand and build this podcast up so that we can continue to bring the best coverage.
Everybody go and here's something I learned from one of these influencers that likes to steal my content. All right, as a professional reporter. All right. Now I went through the numbers and I looked at the number of you that were watching, and you're not subscribers. They do all this crap. All right. That's marketing crap. I don't do that. All right. But I'm trying to get better at it. Subscribe, share, comment down to comments. If you're watching this on YouTube, just drop it in there. One of us will write back to you. All right. What do you like? What do you dislike? All right. I don't understand why these freaking golf caps are on all the time. I'll probably drop that in the comments. I'll be like, yo, man, what's up with this golf gear? What the hell is ain't nobody golfing up there in Chicago. All right. So if you want to rip on Patrick, you absolutely do that too. That'll work also. Right. Don't rip on me. Everything I do is
He's got a very fragile ego. He's got a very fragile ego.
Don't say shit about me. All right. All right. But if you want to rip on Patrick, you can go all day down to comments. All right.
So we're going to try and do at least a couple of more shows before Christmas, and we'll have a little break around the holiday, and then I'll probably be taking a little break as we're going to have a new baby in our house, and I'm not going to sleep at all for a few weeks. So I'm looking forward to that. If you think the bags under these eyes are already a little much, just wait till you see me in February or March. So, but for the meantime, guys, thank you so much for your time and your support. And Tom's right. Like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. And we'll talk to you again next time on the Ground Game Podcast.